While this is open, we'll have a quick look at how the gearbox works. The L85 gearbox is a unique design that G&G created to fit into the bodywork of the L85. It's actually a two-part gearbox, and to strip it out of the gun you need to remove the upper, but this is beneficial because if you ever need to do work on it, such as changing your velocity by removing the spring, this is really great because you don't need to access the rest of the gearbox. Basically there's a pin here that removes, which takes a little bit of effort, and then the spring on the back for the bolt release catch, and then it simply hinges up and slides forward slightly and comes away. Once inside, you see the exposed gears. This is potentially a useful thing if you ever want to maintain the gun, oil it, grease it, check for any wear and tear. The upper gearbox contains the piston, the tappet plate, and the spring, etc. And this little device on top, which is the mechanism for the blowback. Now, for anyone that doesn't want to use their blowback, it can be disabled in one of two ways. You can either remove this small little clip, which attaches up inside for the bolt mechanism, or you can slide it out at the rear and lift it completely off. Okay, to strip this, you remove this stripper plate, which is similar to the version 3 gearbox design, and then there are 4 bolts holding the gearbox together, and that simply splits away, and then you have access to your spring. It's a really nice touch. You could conceivably keep 2 or 3 of these and have different springs in them, but it's so quick, it's hardly worth doing. You can change the velocities really easily on this. This gearbox, the gearbox for the L85, is an extremely long one. It takes a custom piston with additional teeth on it, which is like the SR25 snipers have. The advantage of having the longer piston in this system means that it creates higher compression for the longer barrels. This is great for the longer L85, and should it ever be made, the LSW will benefit from this. In the UK, it has a slight downside that at lower velocities, the longer piston means that the sector gear has a smaller blank space, so the time between the gear releasing the piston and picking it up again is shorter than a normal gun. So on higher velocities, this isn't a bad thing. It's not really an issue. On the lower velocities or the shorter guns, it starts to play a problem, particularly if you're going to use high voltage batteries, because the lower power springs don't push the piston forward as quickly as the higher ones. Therefore, you do stand a chance of creating jamming on the piston. This has been avoided by G&G, who've modded the piston setup for their 2 newer guns, the Carbine and the AFV. They've put a spacer block in front of the piston, which allows you to use a conventional AEG version 2, version 3 piston, same as any other gun. It also means that they've put the standard sector gear in this. The L85, the original, had a specialist sector gear which had additional teeth. It also had an additional pin on the sector gear, which worked in concert with the electrics to create the pre-cocking effect, which the L85A1 has. That works very similar to the PSG1 that Tokyo Marui made, in that when you first pull the trigger, it cocks the weapon. Every subsequent shot, it recocks it each time. The benefit of that is simply that on single shot, you get instantaneous reaction from pulling the trigger to the BB leaving the barrel. On these, however, that's been disabled and they've stuck with a conventional system. This is beneficial for anyone that wants to upgrade and look after their guns. Makes them more reliable on lower FPS. Obviously, with shorter barrels, the compression's more efficient.
Something that the G&G have done with their S80 or L85 series of weapons is they've included a mechanical blowback, which Rob mentioned earlier. The way this works, like you saw when it was in pieces, is there's a plate on the top of the gearbox, which has a little hook, basically connects itself down to the piston itself, and it allows the cocking handle here to move back and forth with the piston. Now, this pretty cool, it does look good, and it adds to the realism, but the downside can be that if you block this cock and handle, because it's a mechanical system unlike G&G's pneumatic system they've done on their M4s and AKs, if this is blocked, it'll break that hook. That hook's designed purposely to break if anything gets in the way to prevent damage to the piston. They've also included a plate which they didn't originally have, but there's now a plate that sits on the top of the gearbox and prevents the hook falling into the gearbox and becoming a problem, getting meshed with the gears and things like that. As Rob pointed out, it's easy to disconnect. You can get rid of that if you so wish.
They also supply spares if you do decide to keep it and ever have any break. It comes as standard with the gun.
Yeah, which is a nice touch. With the L85 series, as I'm sure a lot of you are going to know out there already, a lot of these controls work like they do on the real thing. The cock and handle doesn't go all the way back like it would normally, but it does go that far. Then stretch, you've got your holding open device there. Obviously on the real thing, you would then allow your moving parts to move forward again by pressing on this one here. This doesn't do anything on this replica, but if you push on this one, it does return it. And you've got your dust cover on there as well.
It's worth noting as well that disables the blowback temporarily.
Yeah, that's true actually. Yeah, so you can keep this open and play with your hop up and not worry about the blowback actually snapping this back forward again if you do have the blowback engaged. The hop-up unit that comes in this weapon, unlike G&G's older hop-up units, which left a lot to be desired, this has a completely new type. They've used an entire new bucking, new hop-up unit and new hop rubbers, which give really, really good results. I mean, to be honest, these are some of the best hops I've actually been able to use so far. They're up there with like the old TM hops. The range of them and the consistency is fantastic.
And interestingly as well, with all three of these guns, they're supplied as standard with a Type 4 barrel. Combined with this hop, makes them extremely accurate. Yeah, there is a limit of accessories that are available and are physically able to go on the L85, just simply because of its unique design.
Yeah. Something that G&G have done though, they've included the dovetail rail on the top of these weapons, but what they've done is, quite cleverly, is although it looks the same as the one you would normally get on an SA80, they've actually made it 20mm width, which means that it'll take any 20mm accessories that would normally fit on a Riz, which is really handy, so you can chuck your ACOG or you do whatever you want to throw on the top of this and do away with the iron sights.
Included with the AFV is the British Army's sight, which is called the SUSAT, which means Sight Unit Small Arms Trilets. They've replicated this pretty accurately. The only thing it's got missing is some of the writing that exists on the base of the real one, and on the real version there's a radioactive sort of glowing bar which is covered up by rotating this and uncovered to operate it. Obviously they don't have that. Obviously it's radioactive material and you don't really want to be transporting that by plane. The operation of this sight is slightly different to the normal ones. Whereas with most sights the crosshairs inside are literally a cross, on this one it's what they call a post sight, which is basically a pointed blade. On the real thing that's engraved into the glass, and on this it's either a transfer or painted on, but it does look very similar. It's got rubber eye cup at the back. The eye relief on this is exactly the same as the real thing, which is approximately 25mm. Now this equates to your eyebrow touching the rubber cup, so it's incredibly close. When you're doing that, when you're using this with safety glasses, you're going to find the safety glasses will actually be pressed quite hard up against the sight, making it a little bit uncomfortable to use. The sight picture on this is quite small, but again that's like the real thing, and the adjustment on this is slightly strange compared to any other sight. Rather than adjusting the crosshairs across and up and down for windage and elevation, you actually move the entire sight on its mount. This is done with the elevation adjustment at the back, which is a large dial. That's quite easy to figure out and use. Basically screw in and it goes up. unscrew, goes down, so elevation's really easy. Windage is the trickier of the two. Basically you have two screws, one either side, that are secured with a bolt. Now to move the sight, in order to zero it, you have to back off the bolt in the direction that you want to head, and then tighten it up from this side, and then tighten this back to make it tight again, and then lock them both off with the nuts. Because the eye relief on this is so small, plus it has the rubber eye cap, which makes pressing this in close quite difficult to get the sight picture correct. We would say this isn't a scope you could use with goggles. Rather, we'd only recommend you use glasses. I mean, I've tried this with glasses and shooting glasses, and it works, but it is quite tight to your head. That said, it is a very good replication of the real thing. Everything about this looks the same, but obviously that's a flaw. You'd find that with a real one. The optics on this, unlike some of the Chinese clone scopes that are around, they're nice and clear. There's no bits in them or anything like that, and obviously it fully adjusts, unlike some of the Chinese ones which don't.
Price-wise, these in the UK are around the £350 mark from all your popular airsoft retailers, and in Hong Kong they retail again at around the $350 mark. But obviously you've got shipping and possibly tax and all your other charges that could go on top of that. The pros of this weapon, however, are, because it's a bullpup, this one is shorter than an M4, but it has an M16 length barrel in it. So it's short enough to use indoors and long enough to give you the accuracy and the range that you might want outdoors. Other pros of this model is, for £350, you're getting an almost completely steel weapon, and this is a proper sturdy bit of kit. I'd be happy to drop this a few times without causing any serious damage to it. The only exception to that would be with the cock and handle. If you don't take care of this, because of its nature, it sticks out. That's the only bit I'd be worried about. But other than that, it's just a sturdy bit of kit.
One of the other slight cons, obviously, especially with the AFE, takes a custom battery, as do these, although in both cases you can put mini batteries into them. Yeah, I'd say the biggest con on this is simply that it is a bullpup, and being so solidly made, it's quite heavy.
Yeah.
But that's also its good points at the same time.
But with all the SA80s on the market, because of the way that this gearbox works, this probably is the easiest SA80 on the market to work on. But if you got this far, thanks for watching our review, and look out for more in the future.